Good evening. Hello. Welcome, wherever you are in the world. Isn't it getting colder? Well, maybe there are some places in the world where it's not getting that much colder. But here, it certainly is. So wrap up warm while we discuss personalities and whether or not they're there by design or by nature. And before we start completely, let's go for the introductions. Let's start with Tanys. All bright and autumnal.
I'm in my autumn colors. So I'm Tanys Coughlan from the Twilla Lifestyle Community, Twilla Lifestyle Academy. And I am in Ottawa, Canada, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I help people with their spiritual journey and help them to release the frequencies of grief and trauma.
Oi.
Hi there, I'm Willie Nicol, former cop, corporate security manager, and now I'm a coach. I help predominantly men, sorry ladies, find their mojo when they've gone a wee bit off the track.
Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Jurkofsky with My Holistic Self Counseling and in Ottawa area with Tanys with Twilla Lifestyle. And I am a registered psychotherapist, a certified Canadian counselor, and an intuitive life coach. And I help people on their journey. I walk alongside them and provide tools and insights and challenges to help them on that journey so that they can be ready to go alone and feel confident in being able to navigate life's ups and downs.
Mary.
Normally I say one thing, but I'm going to change what I say today. I'm Mary Corbett. I'm a coach in Ireland, and I am finding myself, for some reason, spending most of my time supporting individuals who've been made redundant at work, and we help them figure out their next role, or maybe even designing a new life. It's always much more fun. So that's what I'm at these days, and it's fun.
That sounds very much like what we're doing today. Angela.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Angela Daye from Inner Pathways, and I love working with people who aren't quite where they want to be in life. And it could be because they've got pain that's dragging them down and all their energy spent dealing with pain, or it could be that they're carrying baggage, or they just don't really know what they want next. So, using kinesiology and coaching, I help to clear out the blockers and help them to move forward in the direction they want to go in, preferably a little bit baggage light where possible.
And I'm Leslie Marsh, and I am a therapist also, as well as some other things that possibly don't mean anything here. But anyway, I help people when they ask for help and when they come forward because they've realised that something is not going quite right. And perhaps they might feel that they're in the wrong job or they're not feeling nurtured and cared for within that career or job. And so I also help the businesses they work for to hurry up a little bit and allow them to express themselves better. Now, personalities, design or default, like factory settings. Do we have a different personality? Do we have many personalities? What's going on? Angela.
I think it's one of those ones that we all feel as if who we are is fixed. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And whether you do the personality tests or you listen to what people say to you and take on board other people's comments as to who they think you are, it's not necessarily how you feel inside. And I think there is also that part that how we feel and how we portray ourselves can be coming across as two different personality types. And if you look at the kind of Myers-Briggs stuff, I found myself, I've done it a couple of times, and it's not always the same results. So I think there is the ability to tweak and change. We might not have that choice as to what those changes might be, but there is the opportunity that these things can meander.
Jennifer, what do you think? I'm under the influence of the idea of the multifaceted persona that we show a little bit to each person, a bit like a burlesque dancer. That could be interesting. Let's go with that.
That could be very interesting to explore. Yeah, I use a lot of different modalities for looking at the personality with clients, and I use the Enneagram, I use human design, among other things. And what I find is I prefer the personality type measures that actually look at multifaceted human experience, as opposed to just kind of putting us in a particular box, right? And so when we look at this and kind of go, okay, is this design or default? There's a little bit of both and a lot of other stuff, right? And so, you look at something like human design and it's kind of a blueprint for you, but it also shows you all of the places where you're open to conditioning and influence from other people and the way that that impacts who you think you are, but may not necessarily resonate with who you truly are. Or the Enneagram that really looks at how you develop your worldview and the way that those defense mechanisms show up in order to survive things that happen in your life. And then, we look at these and we go, okay, what is the point of having these? And it is about transcending, right? Can I notice this and can I move beyond the conditioning and the way that I'm supposed to be in the world so that I can truly honor what feels authentic for me?
Willie, do you find that with men, they kind of, I suppose men and women and anybody in between, would find that their personality sometimes surprises themselves when they get stuck and they don't see the way out or through?
Funnily enough, I recently posted LinkedIn about being stuck, still trapped under constant knockbacks. We can become stuck, and if we have, shall we say, challenges, that can only reinforce the stuckness, so to speak. However, I do think there is the men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Men tend to be, I don't know, more closed, more reluctant to open up, unwilling to admit that they need help. So I think that's part of a kind of masculine template, if you like. Myself, for example, at my advanced age, was heavily influenced by my father, who was heavily influenced by being in the Second World War, where men were men and pansies were flowers. So I can't say that, can I? Right, okay. So you know what I mean? That a handshake or a pat at the back was about as emotional as we got. So there is that design element where you absorb by osmosis the traits and attributes of the men around you. Women, on the other hand, are much more nurturing. And I think that probably has to do with mothering and looking after the family. But default, yeah, you can default into other, I don't know, characters. When I joined the police, and when I left the police, I was a totally different guy because by default, I morphed into a police officer and I had to change a lot of things. So it's a very fluid thing. And I think, yeah, many people are multifaceted and multi-personalized, if you like. But the challenge for us therapists and coaches is to peel away the layers like an onion and find out what's really going on.
So, Mary, what do you reckon?
I reckon it isn't an either or. It's a yes and. It is default and it is design and it is accident and it's a whole bunch of other things. And what I find was, I think my sense of what I believe now is that we have core elements. There's pieces of us that are core, that are part of our inner soul, but our circumstances and who we interacting with can have a powerful influence on it. But when there's a mismatch between what the others bring to the equation and what our core is, then we get that, don't really like being around those people. They're not my type of people anymore. And I think, Willie, you were referring to it, when you went into the police, you became a policeman, the policeman persona. And then there comes a time when, actually, no, that's not really, there's a mismatch between that. But when you're there day in, day out, it almost like it's habitually, you've become that persona. which may or may not really be true. Because I've always been fascinated about people who were difficult at work and little softies when they went home to their families and completely different teddy bears. And we've always had them, especially in corporate, these tough leaders. They were teddy bears at home with their own families. They were big softies. They completely different personalities. So I do think there's a very strong influence that we sometimes behave in a way in our work world that may or may not actually be good for us and be true to ourselves because we believe it's the way to fit in and I want to be seen to fit in. So I think it's a gorgeously complex topic.
Yeah, there's the Toltec idea of domestication, in that we are each of us in our space, in our families, in our tribes, in our clans, in our countries, domesticated to that culture and to what the expectations of that culture and that clan, tribe, family will be. How we break out of that, though, is an interesting thing. I kind of did it by accident in a way. But when I went to live abroad and would come back after the first couple of times, I came back and I realized that, life goes on without you. People still do what they habitually do, what they regularly do. And when someone's coming back in from somewhere else, if it's not an abnormal thing, if it's not a relatively novel thing, it will become part and parcel of an expected event. And so it will just be accepted, like pork, be assimilated. Resistance is futile. You will become part of the stream of thought, the flow that's going on. But it also gives you an idea of in some ways, just how effective or ineffective your presence is when you go away and come back and people don't really notice.
I almost wonder it's maybe there's even more to it than that. So you're traveling along the path together with the people that you're around, and you've potentially gone off to a different country. They stayed where they are, but rather than continuing to do this, you started going like that. So you're still moving, you're still progressing in whatever direction you need to progress in. And it could just be that you're not running parallel anymore. You've brought new experiences in, you've brought new different cultural aspects in, so that there's that bigger divide between who you were and who you left. And just because you left people behind doesn't mean they've stopped. So I know with my family that when they moved to the UK, like it was in the 60s, I think my grandparents still had the attitude that the people they left behind hadn't changed and nothing else had changed. And they were looking at the country with rose-tinted glasses as to what it was in the 50s and 60s and not realizing that they'd moved on to the 90s and the noughties and so on and so forth, just the same as the UK had, but perhaps things hadn't moved in tandem and it had morphed in such a way. But I think there's also that element that, just as what Mary was saying, who I was at work was different to who I was with my parents, was different to who I was with my siblings and extended family, was different to who I was at school or at university or with school friends or whichever groups of friends, and even to the different volunteer organisations that I was involved in. I was almost a different person at every single one of those. So if you dropped the Angela from the volunteer work into the Angela at work, people wouldn't know what hit them. Because in my volunteer work, I knew what I was doing, I was massively confident, and I was in control. And in work, I was just a cog in the wheel. And I just bowed down to whatever pressures came from above and from the corporate juggernaut that I was in a small part of. So I behaved very differently. And I wonder if that behaviour difference between each of these different silos, for want of a better way of putting it, can then impact on your personality. So you as a whole might be one thing, but you're showing a different face to each of these places, or perhaps you're not showing anything that's real to these places and you're showing what you think people are looking to see.
Dennis, do you think that that's possibly the idea of living down to the perception of other people's expectations?
Yeah, I think partially we do that. I think we wear different hats. That's kind of how I usually talk about it. We're wearing a different hat at each place. I mean, I'd like to think that we all have our core beliefs and our core personality that you're just showing different facets of the same core when we're doing that. And that's kind of why I usually describe it as hats. If you're looking at personality, things like the Mayan glyphs or astrology, that kind of thing, those are indicating that, really at that time of your birth, there was a specific energy that creates a personality. And so for years and years, people have looked at astrology and stuff for what is my sort of, where am I swayed to be because I was born on that day. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be, but it can be an indicator. And sometimes with human design, I know Jen and I have talked about this, that there's a component in there that you look at sort of what you are when you're sort of not healed, and then while you're going towards that, I forget the terms, Jen, but you can fill that gap in. And then there's the healed one. In sort of, we could be in any of those kind of things, but essentially that whole grouping is the same part of that personality type. So what are those three things, Jen?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So in human design, it's the same. It's based in the stars. And what we look at is what we are in our conditioned state. So things that we take on that are not ours at all, that we have to decondition from. And then we look at the things that are part of our design. And we look at the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi, or the enlightened state of those things. And so we look at it and go, okay, these things that are not mine, that are purely conditioned, I can work towards releasing and letting go of. These things that are a part of me, I can embrace all aspects of it. I can embrace the shadow aspect of it, which is actually going to help me to release the gift of it and move towards that enlightened state, right? So we look at it in a way of, both what I need to work on releasing, but also what I have to embrace. And it allows this kind of bigger, expansive knowing of who we are at any given moment. And I just want to speak to the idea of being different in each place. In human design, we have what's called the G center, and it is the identity center, the center for love, identity, and direction. This center, really, if it's defined, you will find that people who have a defined center, I have a defined one, tend to be very similar no matter where you put them. They will adapt to the environment and change a little bit here and there, but generally they're pretty much the same no matter where you put them. People who have an open or an undefined G center are made to be chameleons. They are made to shift and change and adapt and flow and really be different in all of these different areas. And it's a beautiful kind of sign for them, because when they're adapting, they adapt in such a way that they go, ooh, I don't like how I just adapted here. It's a sign that they're not in a correct environment. But if they adapt and they go, oh, that was fun, right? Then that's a sign that they're in a good environment for them. So it's really neat to be able to look at the multifacets and all of the layers from that perspective.
It's kind of bringing me up down to
I'm defined, so I've no idea what that then means, because I do all that chameleon stuff, and it is defined.
And I think it's good to note that, these personality typing tools, they can be used as ways to look at ourselves and do that self-reflection, to decide what part of this do I want to be like and what part do I not. And we can adjust aspects of our personality or aspects of our behavior that we want to adjust. But it does help us to look at who our main person is, our main self within.
And I think, and I suppose it comes up for me with a lot of the clients I'm working with, the person they were in the old company, when you get an opportunity to go to a new environment, the same pattern can be changed, and they can go, oh, I don't have to do the working 20 hours, a day and no sleep and taking on too much. I can actually set boundaries. You're showing them all these gifts that they can suddenly acquire, but it does require that they match is that the trait I want to portray? They have to have that reflective piece of, well, which bits do I want to hold on to and which bits would I actually like to let go of now that I have the opportunity of moving somewhere else? So it is a gorgeous time for because you get a lot of that questioning. And I think that's where I realized that there's a core piece of the personality that doesn't move, but there's a lot of behaviors that they've associated with their personality. I was talking to somebody that, oh yeah, no, I'm the neurotic in the office. I'm always the one who's anxious and worried. And you're there asking them, well, do you want to continue to be anxious and worried when you move to a new environment? And I said, the idea that they could actually choose not to was fascinating for them. My sense, though, is they'll still be neurotic in the office. The old pattern will struggle. They really keep reverting back to it. But I do think that when people have environmental things thrown at them that challenge them, it does allow them to look at, well, what is really my personality? What matters to me? And what do I want to continue? So I think there's a balance between the personality and the behaviors they associate with that personality type.
There's a sign I see quite regularly, and it's about joinery and woodwork, etc., DIY. And it says measure twice, fit once, and then shove it into fit. And that's kind of what you were describing there to a certain extent. And Jennifer as well, the chameleon situation. Are we shoving things into fit? Are we shoving ourselves into this jigsaw puzzle part in order to fit, and then realizing that actually it's not quite there yet. And then we pop out and we don't have anywhere else to go. So what do we do?
What you're saying reminds me of the dog's just decided to bark. The memes that I see often, and it's like, just because you fit doesn't mean it's where you belong, right? And it's pictures of like dishes in the gutter or things like that, right? That we look at it and we go, well, yeah, I could make myself fit here, but is it actually correct for me?
Are we comfortable in our discomfort? Is that what it is, Willie?
I think there's a kind of human pressure to try to fit in, because you don't want to be the odd man out or the odd woman out, or you don't want to be the square peg in the round hole, because that makes you visible. And a lot of people don't like being visible. But by the same token, if what you're doing doesn't adhere to, I talk about core values, your core beliefs, your principles, your standards, if you're not adhering to them, you're living a kind of false life, and it's uncomfortable and it's ill at ease, and you're in a state of unease, which leads to dis-ease, right? So if you're in an environment where you're not happy, you're not comfortable, you're trying to fit in, but it just doesn't feel right, that can be very detrimental to both your physical and your mental well-being.
It's stressful for a start. Trying to be something where you don't fit. It makes your cortisol levels just fly every day, because, also it's kind of any time now they're going to find out that I shouldn't be here and that I can't do this job. And so I've got to make sure that people don't see me too much, but realize that I'm here just enough to keep paying me.
Sounds like imposterism.
Yeah, that thing is not supposed to exist anymore. Angela.
Which part?
Oh, pick one. Just go for it. Take a facet and go for it.
I've now got to that point. You've just completely bamboozled me with lots of different things. I'm thinking I don't actually know which bit I do want to pick.
Yes, I've done it.
But there is that element of I'm not good enough, so I've got to contort myself into a position where I fit, or I don't stand out, or I can hide, or whatever the story is that you're telling yourself. And I do remember at times when I was in one of my previous jobs, like, not actually giving me any work to do this week, but they're still paying me. am I supposed to tell someone about this? Or am I supposed to just keep my head down and get, what am I supposed to do here? And you can end up in that massive cycle of, what's going on? Am I supposed to? Because I used to get into trouble for being too honest in a role, and I was like, so have I got to be less honest? Have I just got to keep my mouth shut? Is that what that means? And it's, you know, a lot of that is around communication. And I think if we can actually communicate better, we don't end up sitting there going, well, so I'm just going to wait to find out I'm not good enough. Because actually, chances are, if you were to ask someone how you were doing in the job, they would tell you you're completely adequate or you're doing really well. And it's only in your head that you're thinking, nah, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I think there's a piece of that, having that open dialogue and communication. But then is that a personality thing that we need to learn to do that we've maybe been told not to do so much of? So yeah, my brain's just all over the shop
Or
now.
is it the
Sorry.
case that that's the only language we've been taught? That's the only language we know how to speak because that's been our domestication. That's what has been expected of us.
Yeah.
Like,
Or that's what we've witnessed, that's what we've
Yeah,
seen, that's what we're now
exactly.
modelling.
And it hurts very much if you don't do it that way. And sometimes we find that out quite literally on occasions. However, I was thinking more in the idea of the expectations, and Nick Hall says a lot about it when he was talking about students who were studying to be doctors. And very, very many of them were doing it because their fathers and their grandfathers or their mothers and their grandmothers were doctors. The family was doctors, so I've got to be a doctor. But they were not really in it. They were struggling. And it was causing
At
them
their first
more.
sight of blood, they're fainting and they can't cope with it. Yeah, that type.
Oh, quite a few of them have done that. You know, you usually drag them out by the heels and just say, right, sit there and just get on with it. And we'll see you in the theatre next time. You'll get over it. Don't worry. But that is the
But
thing.
perhaps that's putting somebody into that, we're going to fit you into this box.
Yes, this is it. That's what I was just going to
Getting over
say.
it's not the right thing for them.
That's what I was just going to say. Sometimes people trying to be helpful because they think that's exactly what they want to do, and they don't realize they're trying to live up to somebody else's expectation of keeping the family tradition going. You know, if I was going to do that, I'd be a secretary right now. You know, or a fishmonger.
Shopkeeper, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I think I came closer to the fishmonger and my father's ODA situation going on when I went into veterinary nursing. It was something to do with animals and there was surgery involved. So, you know, maybe I did. I don't know. I kind of went around with it in a very strange way. But then that's me. So, and yeah, that is the one thing that I do know about me. If there's a difficult way to do it, I'll find it. Because it's much more interesting that way. You
For
get
you,
to learn
perhaps.
Well, you get to learn a lot about yourself when things are getting a little bit rough. Let's face it. Tanys, what do you think?
Well, I can't help but think about the energetics of all of this too, because when we're thinking about being in a group and we want to be cohesive with the group, or you're in a workplace, you know, it's much more comfortable to be around people that are of a similar vibrational frequency, right? You know, there's a physics law that if you have one high vibration person and a low vibration person, the low one is going to rise. And so when you have an environment that's not quite right for you, it's going to be uncomfortable. So uncomfortable energetics in the environment as well can make a difference to how somebody's going to behave. Because if we're drained all the time, then we're going to behave a certain way, right? Whereas if we're with like-minded people or whatever, and we're similar vibration, we're going to be more energized, and that's going to change kind of how our behavior is within that. So I think our base frequency can be a certain frequency, but again, we learn every day. Every time we learn something new, we become somebody new. We have the opportunity to be something different by learning something new every day, and that can help change that.
Is that what you're doing with your redundancy people? Are you redesigning or helping them to redesign their idea of what they can do and what they're leaving behind?
I think sometimes, as absolutely, sometimes one of the things I find quite fascinating is actually encouraging them to grieve when they leave and actually stay with the emotions of losing their job rather than rushing into the next job. And they haven't even left one job and they want to have the interview got on the next job and moved on to the next one. You're no, just slow down a little. But because I suppose what you find is that there will have been elements of the job they had where they thrived. There are also likely to be elements where they did not thrive. And so they have this wonderful opportunity to say, well, can we make choices here to get more of what we thrive at and a little bit less of what we don't, rather than rushing into the next job. But it is because I've become so clear, every company, every firm has its own personality, for want of a better description. They have their way, their culture, they're their family, they're the grouping that they operate in the same way. And there's a huge amount of adapting that we have to do when we switch groups. And especially with people who've been, 10, 15, 20 years in the one company. It's fascinating what they do, the learning that they have to do when they move.
Like the mapping over, because
The
it's
mapping
like
over is completely, and then they will have been through mergers and acquisitions and all that other wonderful good stuff, but that's much more controlled than
it's that
going
kind of
into
thing
something
though.
completely new.
It's that kind of thing though, isn't it? That it becomes a muscle memory to a certain extent when this relationship that we have with work, with life, with the whole thing that's going on, we find a groove and we stick with it because it's
Yep.
comfortable there and we know where we are and we know what we're doing, we know what to expect. And suddenly somebody comes up and goes, fix the needle, and we jump out the groove and we're like, where am I going? Where am I going to land? What's going to happen?
Yeah,
So
it's great fun watching the language people use around. They talk about it as being work and habits and practices, but you're actually hearing things about their personality at all times because it's how they dealt with it and how they processed it. And sometimes they do it from that description of themselves, and sometimes all of the elements of personality are attached to the employer and the former colleagues. They don't talk about their own personality. It's what they had to do. So there's a separation. It's fascinating listening to them.
But surely there's an element of that as well, though. If they've gone through mergers and acquisitions and all these types of things, they're going there together.
Yeah.
Redundancy is very much
It's
not
a solo
together.
journey. Yeah, it is a wonderful, I'm one of those people who says every redundancy is a gift. We'll find a gift in it because we'll either find a new opportunity, we'll get something nicer, we'll do something better, but that's me. But others will have absolute fear because it's a journey like that, and it's a journey they're doing on their own for the most part.
And if they've had that loyalty to the organisation and the company, there's massive grief and there's massive potential for trauma.
Yep.
So I know myself, I've gone through it a couple of times, and the first one I was waiting for, the second one I didn't expect. But actually I kind of drifted with it. I'm working with someone right now who that's not the case. They've just been told this week. So it's all very, very new for them. And there's very much hurt and yeah, lots of grief, I think is probably the best way to put it. That they don't really know why, where, why me, do I have to go? And it's that very strange, complicated emotions that are going on around it. It's not straightforward, but again, not a single one of those people going through that list of people that are now being looked at as to whether they stay or go. Not one of them is going to have the same experience. They're all going to have
No.
slightly different nuances. Whereas if they were together, there might be some slightly nuances, but overarching, everybody's going through this change together.
individually though, it's like an excision of identity. Who am I if I am not this? And I think that's also why personality and design and default wise, we do not leave situations that are not necessarily good for us. Because we have identified not as a person, but with the situation.
And it's mine.
Well,
Yeah, it's mine, and I know who I am here. I know what to expect here. Even if it is ended up in casualty on a Saturday night, I know what's going to happen. I can deal with that. But can you? How are you choosing to do that? But it's also there's a lot of things with redundancy perhaps as well. They don't even realize that they would have been in a bad relationship for a long, long time. In a relationship that wasn't nurturing them, that wasn't actually for them as much as it was for the vampiric company that was sucking all the life out of them.
You've
I
just
waited for
described,
the first one.
you've just described me, Leslie. When I retired from the police, went into the corporate security world. I worked for a big company, multinational company, and they were horrible. Well, the British arm was horrible. And I was unexpectedly made redundant. My first reaction, which was my kind of go-to reaction, was fury. Right, I was ready to rip someone's arms off because it was actually quite unjustified the way they did it. As it turned out, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't grieve because it was a shit job and I didn't enjoy it. So there was no grieving done. Once the anger was over, then there was the worry, the apprehension of whatever. But I became a coach basically because my wife told me to. Well, a bit more than that, because it appealed to me. So redundancy, as Mary says, it's not the end of the world. Absolutely not. There are opportunities. There's maybe Jennifer said, gifts there. When I do a bit of career coaching for retiring police officers who invariably have no idea what they want to do, which is very similar to being made redundant. What do I do next? And my kind of very basic advice is do what feels right. Do what feels right for you, which will make you smile in the morning when you get out of bed. That's the bottom line. You can build on that. And I think Tanys was talking about energy. Does it feel right? Is the energy right? When I was in the police, although I didn't know it, I could feel when things weren't right. This isn't right. This is not going to go well. Someone's going to kick off here, right? And that's doing me good stead in the coaching environment. But basically, all I would say to people is, if whatever you're doing just now, whatever your personality type is, if it doesn't feel right, do something else.
Strangely enough, though, sometimes the small wins are enough to keep you there. The times when you sit and something goes completely right and something lives instead of dies, you sit there and go, if I hadn't been here, that would not have happened. And that's what keeps a lot of people in place, is when you get small win. And that's got to do with domestication as well, to a certain extent, and communication and the language that's used from probably conception, never mind birth, because you're always listening energetically into what's going on. And just because you're in the primal soup in that womb doesn't mean that you're not taking up the energy from the person you're living inside of. And so could we be actually inheriting personality or a reactive instead of a responsive mode of being that we carry on? And then therefore look for places where we can be reactive and responsive. Is that a possibility?
When you think about
Angela?
epigenetics and all of that, right? We carry so much throughout
Yeah.
generations and all of, lives and whatever else. One thing I want to speak to really quickly, though, this idea of in a group. So the moment that our energy is interacting with another person, we change. You put that into a group of people, everybody changes. Right. And there's terms for it in human design. We can talk about the penta and the wa and all that. But the idea is that each time you move from person to person or group to group or big organization to big organization, you now no longer have a completely separate identity. You become identified with that group and you take on aspects of that group. And so it's really easy, as you're all talking, that piece of falling into the conditioning of the energy of that group and taking that on and then thinking, oh, this is who I am. Then when you get moved out of that group for whatever reason, there's almost a crisis moment of, well, who am I now? And we have to look at it and go, okay, how much of that was actually me? And how much of that was me in the group, right? And how much of it wasn't me at all? It was just adapting and changing in order to, as you said, fit that square peg into the round hole.
And that's the psychology of the mob rule, though, as well, isn't it? Going with the, getting excited, getting totally caught up in things and going with that flow, because you don't want to be the one who's retracting and detracting from that. Because we are kind of pack animals. We do like to be together.
Sometimes.
So yeah, there are a few of us who are miserable persons who like to be on our own all the time.
I was just going to go for antisocial rather than miserable, but that's fine.
Well, a lot of people would describe being antisocial as being miserable because they would feel that would be how it would be for them. I think it's actually wonderful on occasions to be on your own and to actually just sit there with yourself and say, yeah, I don't have to be anybody. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to listen to anything. I can just be. And I think that if we could do more of that, perhaps we would quiet down the noise and allow that understanding to come in that says, yeah, this is what it's for. This is why it's here. This is what you want to be listening to or watching or being or doing. And that's our universal mind, the collective consciousness thing coming in. Because while we've got things stuck in our ears and listening to all the rest of it, surely we're not listening to that quiet voice anymore. The one that says, nah, don't be silly. They'll be fine. Don't get stressed.
I remember in my first coaching training course where the trainer said, very often there's a big brass band playing round about us, which is drowning out the little quiet flute inside us. Meaning the quiet flute being your inner voice, your inner wisdom, your intuition has been drowned out by the big brass band of all the noise round about you. But if you get rid of all the noise round about you and listen to the little flute, things will go a lot better.
And actually, if we don't hear if the little flute wasn't there, we would actually notice.
Yep.
What else can we do? Are we promoting the idea that we can design a better psychological, emotional, spiritual way of being for ourselves?
That's the mission possible. Should you choose to accept that mission, I would recommend it.
Absolutely.
And
I
I think
think
the
it can.
personality tools actually just give you a place to start.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of it, is that a lot of people don't know where to start. And basically it's here. Now. Wherever here and now is for them. So when
One of the
we
things I love really quick about this, because you said, where do you start? Is, we don't want to use these things so that we put ourselves in a box, but we want to use these things so that we can come home to ourselves and go, wow, that really resonates for me. Yes, that's how I want to be. You mean I have permission to actually be that thing that I think I am that doesn't necessarily fit with what somebody's expecting of me? Cool. Okay. I want to move in that direction.
I think it reminds me a little bit of the old tale of the Minotaur. And the little guy who went, I'm wondering who put the string in there in the first place. I can't remember that part. But he picks up the end of the string and he has to follow the end of the string before he gets into the centre where the Minotaur is and finds out everything he needs to know. But did he roll that ball up while he was going? Or did he remember to leave it there so that he could get his way back out again if he needed to? There's an interesting song by Anna Nalick called Breathe. And I think that
You like
part
that
of it,
one. You've mentioned it a few times.
I do like that, because I think there's a lot in it that's got to do with the soul searching and the kind of dark night of the soul situation that can go on with it. And she makes a point of being in a tunnel, going one way and ending up in a cul-de-sac kind of thing. But realizing that we're just as, what is it she says? We're just as
We're
far
just
in
as far
as
in
we
as
are
we'll ever be out.
be out. But the only thing we don't think about doing is turning around and going back. So whether it's by design or whether it's by accident, default, fate, destiny, there are different things that we can do, different ways that we can approach them. And again, it comes down to how we either react or respond to things. And how we understand that we are always more than we think we are, as Mr. Erickson would say. So think on that. Till next time.